Okay, so we're back for season 2, episode 2, which is
Ep
exciting.
two.
Back to
Ep
our
two.
back to
Yay.
our normal home settings. And yeah, first, cheers. Start off with our cheers. I saw you both taking a
Cheers.
drink, and I was like, okay, yes.
Cheers.
Krista's
Mine's
still
not-
repping Casey.
I know.
Of course. Come on, I just got back from Kelsey Jam. I have to be repping Casey.
Yeah, but we don't love every Kansas City Chief right now. I'm sorry.
That's
Ooh.
fair. That's a fair point. That's a
I
fair
don't know
point.
about this. What's the
I am
situation?
surprised.
I bet you have seen stuff about it and you just didn't realize he was a Kansas
The
City.
commencement speech.
Oh,
gate.
okay. Yes,
He's the-
I did not
he's the
realize
Chiefs
he's a Kansas.
kicker.
Okay, yes, we talked about that last time. We did. I just
Yeah.
didn't know what his job was. I'm like, where am I?
His job.
Yes.
What's happening?
Very true.
Great.
Mm.
News is important sometimes. Maybe I should check it out. Anyways, today's topic, we're doing something a little bit different, and we are focusing on kind of a central theme. And so the theme for today, these two are humoring me so much by letting me dive in with this question, because it's one I've been thinking about a lot. And we talked about 3 different questions. I feel like they're all kind of related, but the theme for this one is what is real. And so this means a little bit of context, a little bit of color here for the people listening. So one of the most nuanced things about being a human being and having a human brain is that almost all the time you have so many conflicting things that are true at the same time. So my question is, how do you filter and land on what you believe or what you think is true or what information is reliable? And so this is particularly important right now because it's an election year and it's top of mind. And so when you think about the news, this is one way to think about this question. You think about all these different angles that put spins on information within the context of media. And it also applies to how we make decisions about the narrators that we trust within our own lives. So parents, friends, partners, how do we trust what other people tell us versus our own gut feelings, which are kind of fueled by our nervous system, which is so wild in and of itself that that's how we are controlled, basically. So let's start with a high level question. And I want to ask both of you, is this something that you struggle with, or do you feel like you have a pretty good system worked out for making decisions day to day?
For me, it depends. I think it's really interesting that it seems like each of us took this question in different ways. So I feel like Allie, like your post about it on LinkedIn was very much like, what is real in media? Like, this is an election year. And then mine was very much like, how do you make decisions based on your gut or your logic? And I feel like the media thing is so different to me that I feel like that side of things, I'm very logical. Like if I'm looking at something based on like politics or making decisions in that way, very logical. If it's my own life, personal life stuff, I tend to way over index on my gut. And I've never really thought about that before. The fact that I'm so wildly different depending on the situation. But is that true of y'all as well?
It used to be very hard for me to make my own decisions. I used to turn outward quite often to external like rhetoric or, religion. I grew up in the church. People around me, sometimes genuinely because I wanted their support, but other times because I wanted their approval, and therefore I'd make decisions using their rationale. Now I'd say, especially in the past year or two, I'm very, not all the time, it depends situation, but for the most part, I'm very in tune, I think, with my gut voice, and not my gut voice in that it's my nervous system, like my bodily reaction, but more so like, this feels right for me. I think what's interesting though is when it comes to figuring out like what is true, real, reliable, etc., I think it's important to define like what for each of us is black and white and then what is a little bit more fluid. Because I think, and this recalls for me the values conversation we had last season, where some things are, and it's subjective to each individual. Like some components of our lives are open to opinion, it's a case by case basis, day to day, whatever it is, it's fluid. And then there are some components of our lives where it's pretty black and white. Like to us as individuals, it's an either or. So I think that's where I'd like to define first, after Kaylee weighs in on like what, zooming out, what components of our lives is it important to figure out the reality, and then what components are we okay with it being case by case, I guess.
Yeah. I think that makes sense. I will say that I don't think that I'm a gut read person. I think when I was a little kid, I had a really good read on all of that because I was a super sensitive kid. I would cry at the drop of a hat, felt very big feelings all the time. And I think I still do that as an adult. But what has happened is I have become very used to looking to external sources to validate and or direct what I should do. And so one thing I'm really trying to do right now is relearn the gut read on things and how to trust it and how to trust myself. And Allie, you mentioned your tattoo last time we were in person. It's about Emerson and self-reliance. And I think that's something I need to go back and revisit because it's really easy, especially as a woman, to defer to what everyone else wants in a lot of different situations. And I have lived a lot of my life that way. And I can't say it's a great move. Because it's gotten me to a place where I feel very disoriented. And it creates this situation of like, I don't know what's real or true because I don't hear my own inner voice. I just hear a million different voices from other people. And so now I'm like trying to sift through it all and figure out, okay, how do I really feel about this? And that's hard. It's really hard. It's much simpler in the media context of like, I find a news source that I trust, but this is so gray. This is such a gray area.
Yeah, I don't know if it's worth us talking about the media stuff because it is black and white to me. I think it's less about like when I posed that question online, it wasn't as much about like how do you figure out if a source is real. It was more of like how do you figure out what you believe so then you can go to the sources that actually educate you. Because I think sometimes people get so focused on the source they don't even know like what do you actually think about this? Like everything else aside, how do you feel about this issue? Like what is your belief on this and what are you allowing to inform that belief, you know? Because I think some people don't even bother to figure out what their position is. They just get so caught up in all of the minutia and the drama. So that was more about my angle. Like I don't really think we need to talk about like media sources. But yeah, Kaylee, I mean, I first read that essay in 8th grade and it was the first thing that ever taught me to look inward. You know, I was in the throes of my religious experience and nothing in that education ever taught me like what feels right to you. Does this how does this feel to you? Like, does this person make you feel good or make you feel unsafe? Like I was never educated on that stuff. And that essay was the first thing I read. It was part of some school project. And I was like, oh, I can just ask myself if this feels right. And I've read it every single year since I was in 8th grade. If you haven't, listeners, Self-Reliance by Emerson, highly recommend.
Yeah. So I have some sub questions related to this one. So let's dig a little deeper on this one of like, how do you learn to trust your inner voice? So how do you know when to defer to logic? So this means like your past patterns, the existing information you have about the subject, the context you have from your own personal experience within that, and when to trust your gut. So how you feel in your body, like the bodily sensation you get. I would describe it as like, this makes me feel panic, or this makes me feel dread, or this makes me feel sad. Or it could even be as simple as like warm, cold. Some people call it like right, wrong. It's the things that go against logic. It's so when you have a situation that you're facing and you have to decide, should I use my logical brain or should I use my emotional brain? So head versus heart. When you're answering these types of questions, how do you decide which one to use, which system to trust, or which part of your brain, depending on how you're looking at it? Any thoughts? It's hard. It's really hard.
It is. I will say, as someone who typically goes with my gut, like in situations where my gut is telling me to do something and it's in direct conflict with my logic or whatever, I will almost always consider risk. So, like, if I follow my gut and it doesn't work out, am I okay with the risk, with that risk? Like, is that risk worth it to me? Versus like the risk of not acting on my gut and being wrong there. So I almost always use like, which risk am I willing to take? The risk of following my gut and being wrong, or the risk of not following my gut and being wrong.
Yeah.
And I feel like that usually has worked out for me.
Give an example.
Yeah. Oh
Give an example of like a past experience.
I mean, moving to LA.
It's a good
moving, like leaving LA, moving to Austin, making the jump, making like a career switch at almost 30. Like definitely like lots of those kinds of things in my 20s and early 30s. But I will say, I do think it like gets more complicated the older I get. Like it's the risk becomes way more complicated, and so it's not as easy to be like, I'm just gonna jump and hope it works out. Yeah.
What about you, Allie?
I'm definitely someone who examines risk. I examine like worst case scenario, which I think is actually more of like an anxiety derivative. This is really hard. I mean, it's obviously situational because depending on like what the decision is or what the circumstances are and who's affected and if it has to do with money or, you know, stuff like that. But I think a rationale that I've been using lately, like in the past couple of years, is like, does this make me more proud of myself? And again, that doesn't apply to every decision, right? But like if it comes down to like head and heart, maybe both are part of the mix. Like, is this something I would be proud to do or proud to have tried and failed at? Like, is this like adding to who I am as a person? Like, am I growing because of this? And you can't always evaluate that out the gate. Like sometimes you're in the middle and you're like, oh, that's the lesson that's coming from this experience. But I think for so long, I made decisions, again, based on what other people approve of this. Like, is this something that, am I making this decision so that I'm not alone? Like, does this help maintain my friendships and my relationships so I'm not flying solo? Does this look good out externally?
That's a
like,
hard one. That's a hard one. We're social animals. That's tough.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, especially you're like young, you're in school. I mean, it's a survival thing. Like you obviously make decisions based on who's around you and what they think. But I have to say that was probably 95% of my input for a very long time, to the point where I'd get through an experience or past a decision. I'd be like, no, that was not right for me. Or like, I don't like who I was there.
It's just how we are. Think about how that book that I mentioned a while back, the top 5 regrets of the dying, the number one regret is like, I wish I had lived the life I wanted to live versus like what other people wanted me to live. That's just how we make decisions, which is so unfortunate.
And honestly, like where I am today is fine. Like it all happened for a reason. But it is very clear to me where the line is in terms of like the decision-making inputs, you know, like this conversation today is much different than what I would have probably had to contribute even 5 years ago.
Yeah. I think it's kind of one of those things where you have to try on a bunch of different versions and see how you feel. And I think I've gotten really hands-on with that the last 12 months where I've tried on, let me try this, let me try that, let me try that. And again, it's like checking, how do I feel? Does this feel like the right thing? And your body would be like, nope, not the right thing. Keep going. And so it's one of those things of like, when you're a kid, your parents want to protect you from that experience, right? They want to like catch you before you fall. And they feel like that's their job. It's like, I want to anticipate these trials and tribulations that you're going to go through, and I want to protect you from that. And the real learning, though, is from, let me try this on and see how this feels, and let me drive into the wall 14 times before I get it right, because that's how you learn. And I think that's especially difficult, like Krista, like you said, as you get older. I think in the context of like smaller scale decisions. So example, like you said, leaving LA, going to LA. I think, like for me, when I left my stable job out of college that I got during the economic downturn that the time was, I was like, okay, I want to take this risk, but I want to be strategic about it. So let me give myself 18 months to try freelancing. And if it doesn't work, if I'm like spinning my wheels 18 months from now, let me go back to a stable full-time job and switch gears. And so I think the parameters are an important piece of it. Like, give yourself a timeline, because what's always gotten me into trouble in the past with this is like no scope to these questions.
Yeah.
And so I just go and go and go and go, and I don't make any progress. And then I'm frustrated on top of being no further ahead.
Yeah, I think that's actually such a good point, because like it even can help things feel less overwhelming, like a decision feel way less overwhelming if you're like, okay, this is like either a timeline that I'm setting for this to happen, or this is the timeline I'm going to give myself, and then I can always change back if I need to, if I don't succeed or if this doesn't work out within a specific timeline. I do think that is super helpful for me too.
Yeah.
When you're able. So, I guess it's not always possible.
Yeah, it depends on the situation, of course. So another question related to this is, what do you do when you are trying to kind of fact check and look outside yourself and see what the consensus is when you have conflicting sources but both feel reliable? So maybe your therapist says one thing, but your best group of friends says something totally different. Then how do you decide based on that who to trust or how you feel about things?
For me, this is not something that I have historically been very good at all, but I feel like in the past I would over-index on like maybe what my friends say, because they're the people who like have to be around me the most. I feel like they know me the best, et cetera, et cetera. But to the like up into like to the detriment of how I feel. So like sometimes I would trust my friends or my family or whoever so hard that I would be screaming on the inside like this doesn't feel right. Where now what I'm trying to do is like, yes, I want all these different perspectives, but like I'm very aware of how I feel about it. And I try to resort to like, okay, it is my voice that I need to listen to versus all this outside advice. Haven't been super good at it. It's a new thing.
It's hard. It's really hard to do.
It is.
And you want to trust your friends too. It's so much easier to be like, you decide for me. Tell me what to do, right? Because then you don't have to make the decision.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's a good trick.
That used to be big for me too. Friends and just people who are around me a lot. Because then if you don't go with what they want, depending on how they are, they make you feel bad about it. So it's just sometimes easier to go with the flow. But I think now this is not a hard question for me. Because nowadays, now that I know how my voice sounds, I don't hear it all the time, but I know how it sounds and it feels very right to me. I'm immediately cautious of people who try to tell me how to feel or tell me what to do, because I feel like now, I'm 30. This applies to any age, but I feel like you get to a point where you're like, I have a good idea of what feels right, kind of like what Krista said. And the best way for people to help me is to help me find my voice, to help me remove or navigate through the noise and ultimately reach the destination that's right for me. So if someone's coming in guns a-blazing, here's what you should do, I don't care how you feel, I'm not even going to ask you what you think is right, I actually tend to not listen to them at all, because I'm like, this isn't serving me. Like this isn't in support of me. This is in support of you or what you think is right. Even if you think you're helping me, I just don't appreciate that kind of like black and white approach. But if I have someone coming in who's like, they might have a different opinion, but they start with, what's your gut telling you? Like, what's going through your mind through this decision? Like, what are you leaning towards? Let's talk about it. And then let's say I give an answer and they might disagree because they know me really well or they love me. They're like, well, here's where I'm coming from. Like, how does this sound to you? Like, if it comes through a little bit more collaborative and supportive, I'm more likely to listen to something I might have not entertained before.
Yeah.
But yeah, the black and white approach, it usually shuts me off now.
Yeah. And again, if you have any code dependency like that you've grown used to, that's a really easy thing to default into of like, okay, just tell me what to do. Because I'm not used to trusting myself. So just tell me what to do and I'll do it. You become kind of like taskmaster and task rabbit. It's just like, okay, then I'll do all the things on the list and everything will be fine, right? I feel like it's almost like anxiety mitigation. Like if I follow all the steps, then everything's going to be okay. But the reality is it doesn't work that way. And so then you are exhausted because you've just done all this work and it didn't fix anything.
Something in front of you.
It's an illusion. It's an illusion. It's hard.
I think what I'm getting hung up on most now, like I agree with you, Allie. Like I feel like I have a pretty good idea now of, okay, this is how I feel about this situation. Like these two people are telling me something, I can feel which one I agree with more because of how I feel. But then I get into, but what if I'm wrong? Like, what if,
that's fair.
What if what if I'm wrong? Or like, what if this is me just being selfish? Because there's a little bit of that too, where it's like, is there some sort of like confirmation bias? Like I'm just gravitating toward the people who are confirming how I feel. Is that always a good thing? It's very weird, blurry line between trusting yourself and like, are you being selfish? It's that part I get hung up on, I think.
Yeah, me too. I think this is probably one of the main reasons people say you should meditate, right? Because then it's so easy to distract yourself all day long with like work and TV shows and reading and relationships and all of the things to drown out all of the thoughts. And so when you kind of like sink down into yourself and clear out all the noise, it's like, what do I hear? What do I hear down here in the bottom of this barrel where there's no noise? And that for me I have been so squirmy to do that. That feels like the most difficult thing. And so for me, I'm like, okay, that's the thing you need to do. And so another example of this, about 5 years ago, my friend Emma and I co-hosted a retreat in Austin before Krista and I had even, I think, probably become internet friends. And there was a woman there who did a limiting beliefs thing with a beach ball. And so she tossed each person the beach ball and you had to catch it and say limiting belief. And I was like, this is so corny. I hate this so much. And I was probably sitting there rolling my eyes like, this is so dumb. I hate this. And the woman came up to me afterwards and she was like, I saw you resisting this so hard, and that means you're the person who needs it the most. And I was like, fuck, you're right. You're so right. And it was true. It was true. I probably had the longest list of every person at that place because I was just like, I don't even want to think about this. This is not a problem that I have. Everything is fine. And she's like, no, that means you need it even more. And so I've had to like kind of look that in the face, and it sucks. It's so hard. It is so, so hard.
It really is. It really is. Also, especially because not every decision or situation has a right or wrong. So it's like, there's not even always a right choice, wrong choice, bad choice, good choice.
I would say the answer 99% of the time is it depends. And then it's like, okay, now what?
That's why I said in the beginning, I'm like, I think before you figure out what the decision or the answer is, you got to figure out, is this a decision that there is a black or white to you?
Yeah.
Like, is this something where it is it black and white, or are you okay with this gray area, or the fact that your answer, your right, might be different than someone else's right? Which, like you said, 98 to 9% of the time, that's the thing that's interesting to me. Like, the older I get is like, I'm very, very wary of people who operate with so much black and white, because I just don't think that the world operates like that politically, religiously. Like, I have so much more respect for people that are like, I disagree with you, but I'd love to hear your perspective.
Yes. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
That's
Tell me
it.
your piece. And let's
Yes.
disagree and be okay with it.
And let's learn
That's
from each other.
yeah.
Like, how else do
Yes.
you like educate each other and let all of us exist in this world if we're not open to at least hearing different opinions? You don't have to change your mind.
Yeah.
Nobody changes
Right.
their mind now. Everybody's
Yeah.
digging their heels in.
Everything is black and
Yeah.
white.
Yeah.
But I think a thing that's a part of that too is if it's still gray, you're not there yet. You don't know yet. You don't have the answer. And I think that's another body feeling thing of like if it still feels gray, you're not done yet. You have more things you need to try on. You have more things you need to sit with and think about. Maybe there's more things you need to learn about yourself or about the world or whatever it is. I think it's just a sign that like keep searching. You're not there yet. And I kind of hated that for a long time because I was like, I want certainty. I want to know. I want a hard yes or a hard no.
Yeah.
And you don't get it until you earn it. You have to earn it.
So, are you saying then that you think like eventually all decisions do end up at a black and white stage where you have gone through the gray and now it's black and white for you?
I can't answer that. All I can say is I think you get to a point where you're like, this is not sustainable. Like I read an article in The Atlantic, I think it was, a couple of weeks ago, and it was about Jodie Foster. And she was talking about how at some point in her adult life, she's a very private person, but she was like, I have to change something or I'm going to die. My body is telling me I'm going to die. Another analogy I heard recently was a horse versus a mule. So a horse is like how most little girls are raised. Horses will work to the point of exhaustion. They will work themselves to death. They do not stop when they need to rest. A mule, however, is what most farmers buy because a mule will stop when it needs to rest. And so it's a better long-term investment because with the horse, it's going to work itself until it's dead. The mule is going to stop and recharge and then keep going. And so you want the one that's more sustainable. And so for me as an adult, that means I've had to stop the horse mentality of like, I'm going to push through this and keep going until I am so tired and so stressed that I can't even process where my keys are. You know what I mean? Like, I'm just going to push until I'm at my absolute limit. It's more like, okay, how do I know when to stop? And like, take a beat and then start again. And that is hard. It's really hard to unlearn.
Yeah.
I think the majority of this podcast is just going to be me saying this is hard. This is so hard.
But to go back to the black or white, like, because I think growing up, I mean, I would venture to say as little girls into women, getting like being used to catering to other people's decisions, other people's opinions, parents, friends, partners. For a long time, I did think like when I separated from an old partner and an old friend group of mine who just enjoyed that sense of control, and I was just along for the ride. When I first separated from that and I entered into like back half of my 20s essentially, and I started to realize like, oh, I have people who love me and want me to be successful, and I'm going to go out and figure out my own voice. I first thought that the end state, the destination, was this place of like utter certainty, that I'd be able to make most, if not all, decisions relatively quickly. I wouldn't be double thinking them. I wouldn't be worried about the impact, and I wouldn't be unsure. I would just know. Now, I don't think that that's the end state. I think that the end state, I think that the journey is the destination, y'all. No, I think that there will always be a process of, yes, I think you reach a place where you're closer to confidence. I think you end up operating with a little bit more assurance. But I think for me personally, I mean, I can't speak for everybody. I know there'll always be a part of me that just doesn't know everything. And it actually is pretty exciting to me that for the rest of my life, I'm not only going to be learning more about me, but I'm going to be learning more about the world. And I'm always going to be allowed to change my mind. And the same way that you said you give yourself a scope when it comes to decisions, I'm going to try this out for 6 months, 18 months, whatever the decision is, whatever the timeline is. I also think baked into that is like periodic reflection and knowing that, like, within reason, very little is permanent. And that alone is really freeing to be able to like make decisions with confidence, knowing you're probably not always going to be right, knowing that your right is different than someone else's right, and knowing that with the right people around you, even if you fuck up, it's okay. Like someone might check you and tell you that you're being selfish, and that's okay. Like sometimes we have to be like, I think that's the biggest thing for me when I turned 30 is just like this mantra of like, it's okay. Like sometimes I just have to remind myself that. But yeah, I used to think I'd reach this point where like everything would just be easy and clear. And I just
if only
think that that's ever,
if only,
which also like, I think that's kind of cool that we are always kind of going through this. I don't want to reach this point where nothing is interesting anymore. Nothing is educational. Or maybe I'm just telling myself that.
I think it's also this thing of like, you have to choose your hard. Everything in life is hard.
Yeah.
Are you having a hard time for the right reasons? Are you facing challenges that make you feel better and more confident and more solid about yourself? Or are you making choices that are difficult and you feel constantly frustrated and constantly like, who's gonna root for me? Like, who's gonna cheer for me? And the reality is, at the end of the day, like, only you can do that because nobody else has a vested interest in your outcome, right? Like, if you do not root for yourself, someone else will use you as a tool for their success because there's just no incentive, for somebody to be like, oh, I need to do X for other person. We're selfish creatures, right? Like we all are just trying to take care of ourselves. So I think if you forget that piece of the assignment of being a human being, that's kind of how you end up in that place of like, something's wrong and I don't know what it is, but it feels off. And so then it's your job to like, let me lift the lid on that. Let me look a little deeper. And that's hard work. It's so much easier to be like, nah, I think I'm going to watch TV. I think I'm going to go have a drink. I think I'm going to go on vacation, like all the different forms of distraction. It's like, are you willing to do the hard thing for you or will you do the easy thing? And that's a big question. That's a heavy lift. Another question I have about this is sort of related. Are there any good practices or exercises that you found that help you get better at kind of sifting through these types of situations where a lot of things are true, a lot of different opinions coming your way, you're not feeling certain about kind of which direction to go with a process? What do you do when you face something like this? Like, what's a practice that you have? Anybody?
I don't know that I do have like a practice.
I'm not really a good meditator. I've tried. It's too loud. Meditating is too loud.
It's so loud.
I do my best though to like remove the noise. Like whenever I came up to a tough decision, in the past, I would just collect as much data as possible. I mean, I'd really only go to the people that I loved, but even that would be not necessarily a short list, 5 to 10 people, depending on how desperate I was. And that made it so hard to figure out, what do I think? What do I feel? No, and not at that time, no one was really asking me that. My partner is really good at asking me that. I said my partner, like, you guys don't know his name. His name's Austin. He's a strange man. I've never talked to him before.
Familiar.
Yes, I know. Austin, that's his first question. And oftentimes he will refuse to tell me what he thinks about something because he knows that it confuses me, which I really, really appreciate.
That's nice.
But now, I mean, I'm super sensitive to the voices and the noises that I let inundate my decision-making process. Sometimes it's super little, like, should I buy this dress? Sure, I need an outside perspective. But if it's something pretty big, I've actually set some boundaries for myself to make the decision on my own or with little, I mean, really just Austin and maybe, depending on who's involved, like 1 or 2 more people. And that's me personally, because I used to just grasp for answers. And like you said, Kaylee, looking for someone else to take ownership of a decision. It was like, well, it wasn't really my idea. Like, if this is the wrong idea, these 3 people told me to do it. Yeah. So for me, it's just kind of like maybe isolating a little bit.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah.
Create space for yourself. I think for me, there's three things that came to mind when I was thinking about this question. Number one is like going outside. So going for a walk, going for a hike, that helps me get super quiet and without headphones in. I think that that's a big piece of it because it's really easy to like, oh, I'm going to put in a podcast and distract myself. So just being outside and giving myself space to think. Driving is kind of the same thing. Because you're driving, you can't do a whole lot else. And then just writing stuff down. I think it's been really helpful for me to flip back of, okay, here's where I was mentally 6 months ago. And if I'm seeing the same things come up over and over and over again, it's like, okay, this is literally the definition of insanity. I am banging my head against the wall with whatever this thing is that I'm trying to make a decision about, and I haven't made any progress. I'm just spinning in circles, and I have to do something totally different because obviously this isn't working if I'm still in the same place. Like something is wrong and the process needs to change. So all of that's been helpful.
Yeah, that makes sense. The nature thing, I think, is huge for me, and the driving. Driving without music helps me kind of clear the noise for sure.
Yeah, that's a good one. Love a good drive. So the inverse of that question, what's super unhelpful when you're trying to decipher like what's real, what's true? What are the things that make this more complicated, this entire process?
Right off the bat, continuing to ask different people their opinions. Like that is to me the worst thing you can do.
Yeah, I also think like everybody knows that their friend. What was that?
Dogs. Sorry.
Oh,
it sounded like a kid.
I know. I adore and love all of my friends. I think there's just different strokes for different folks. You know, everyone has the different strengths, everyone has their different opinions, everyone has their different perspectives on life. And depending on what I'm working through, I'll go to certain people. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And I'm probably a certain type of friend for other people as well. And I'm fine with that too. But yeah, I think just like opinions at scale are not helpful at all. More is not more in that case.
Yeah.
So for me, it's just being selective about what I let in my head.
Yeah. I mean, think about even like when you're soliciting feedback at work on something you wrote or a design for something. It's like the more people you add in there, it just gets harder to make a decision and it just postpones things. Like it's the same thing.
Yeah.
It just makes your brain so much noisier than it needs to be. Past a certain point, I do think having a few trusted perspectives is always a good thing. But
yeah, I think the other thing I'm starting to realize through learning the hard way is that no one has all the context that you do about a situation. And so if you're looking to other people to help you make a decision, it doesn't make sense because they don't have the full picture. They only have your version that you're telling them. And that's not like they haven't seen your life through your lens. And so I think that that's why I've been kind of learning like, oh, you really have to defer to how you feel inside your body because your body is this vessel that will tell you good, bad, yes, no. And if you continually ignore it, you'll get sick. You'll get sick and bad things will happen to it because there's too much stress, too much cortisol. You're not sleeping, you're not eating, you're not taking care of yourself. So everything starts to break down. And it's like, there's your sign. You're sick all the time. It's for a reason. Maybe look into that. Saying this to myself.
Me to me. Oh, yeah.
Okay, so final question here on this topic. What types of situations do you think require which parts of your brain? So when it comes to head versus heart, do you feel like there's a default for like 3 core buckets of decisions? Or do you think most situations require both?
I think It's hard.
I think
I think most require both to some
most
extent.
macro decisions require both. I
Yeah.
think that they should. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Career
I think if it's
decisions.
like,
Brooks agrees.
I think if it's like, what am I going to eat for lunch today? That's a brain decision. But if it's like, do I leave this job and try to go do something on my own? That's a whole other category.
Yeah.
And because, especially if you're in a relationship and it has ripple effects on that, and you have all these other factors to tie in. So I think it's kind of these big bucket of like, I'm going to move, or I'm going to get a new job, or whatever it is. Like these are kind of what we're talking about here, where it gets really, really difficult. And it's like, why don't we teach this in school? Like, why don't teachers be like, hey, when you're an adult, you're going to be plopped into this complex situation. Let's talk about critical thinking skills and emotional intelligence and how to evaluate like pros and cons in a really productive way. I feel like those would be really useful skills.
They would.
If
Pretty
only.
infuriating. Yeah, right?
But hey, we learned the Pythagorean theorem, and I got to tell you, I use that every single day.
Yeah, and square dancing. Also that. Super helpful. Thank you so much.
That big parachute game we played at PE.
I did like that
one. Do that daily.
I could actually use more of that. My soul would be happier if I had more parachute in my life.
Austin said they use that at school still, which made me very happy.
I need to go to his
We need to drop in. We need to go drop in.
Excuse me, parachute. Please leave school premises. Do you have a student here? No, we're just here to, hang out.
I also feel like this is going to be a big dividing point for our listeners of like, some people are absolutely going to know what we're talking about with the parachute, and some people are going to be like, what? We were on our iPhones. We don't know what you're talking about. We didn't do that. And that makes me sad.
That's the line. We found the line.
So sad. Okay, so wrap up question. 1 to 2 recommendations of things that you are reading, listening to, or watching right now. I'm combining all my words today. So somebody else, please talk. Listening.
I have a non-media related recommendation, and I put it in the list for last episode. Have y'all ever heard of hypochlorous acid spray? I will go to my grave with this is the best skincare product ever. It was like $13 on Amazon.
What is it?
The way it's been explained to me, it was like an esthetician friend of mine who first recommended it. It's like that. Have you ever seen that orange Tower 28 spray that everyone's like obsessed with all over? I say TikTok, but I'm not on TikTok. It's essentially like a natural disinfectant. And I spray it on my face like multiple times a day. And it just, for me, it's really helped my acne. So if you struggle with acne or inflammation, check it out. There's a cheaper version on Amazon. Super basic ingredient. I don't think it's just very flashy. So I don't think it's been like popular, but highly recommend that. I watched the latest season of Bridgerton, like the basic bitch I am.
Okay, how is it?
What do you think?
Still doesn't beat season 2. Season 2 will just always be my favorite, but it's really good. I like Penelope. I think her story is really interesting.
Yeah.
Well, have you guys watched it?
Yes.
I'm saving this season for this weekend.
Okay. It's good.
Yeah, I've been saving it up.
She's hilarious. Like, I think they just do her character really well. Like, lots of personality. I wish they gave Colin a different haircut is all I'll say. But it's still good.
How's the music this season? I love all the classical covers of.
There's a classical cover of Pitbull, and it's just. First of all, it's amazing. Like it's seamlessly baked into the scene. But once you realize what song it is and what scene it is, you'll just die laughing. So,
amazing.
I can't wait. I think that's my favorite part of the show is how they do that. It's always so good.
I agree.
Oh, okay. I will have to tell you my thoughts on it after I watch this weekend. Kaylee, what's yours?
Okay, so I started watching Fallout on Amazon Prime a couple of nights ago. It's a super long first episode, but I heard Jonathan Nolan. I didn't even know that there was 2 Nolan director brothers. Talk about it on Armchair Expert though, and it got me really curious, and I love a good sci-fi, so I watched it and I love the premise of it. super long episode. It took me a very long time to get through that first episode, but I'm pretty invested now. I love a premise where reality is questioned, and that's all I will say about it. But it's super high production value, really good cast, super strong cast, and just really good storytelling. I always appreciate that they shoot on film because it's aesthetically very beautiful, and I just thought it was a really unique idea. I know it's based on a video game, but I super liked it. I was very intrigued.
So are you saying that the premise is making you ask what is real?
In this case, it's very obvious that it's a premise. It's like, what if reality is actually X? But I'm so on board with any version of that I'm like, okay, yes, I will watch.
It's just very on brand for our episode today. That's all I'm saying.
It is, yeah.
Yes,
what is real?
definitely.
What is real?
Yeah.
Okay, my rec is also a TV show, Baby Reindeer. If y'all have heard of that,
I've heard about the internet talking about it.
It's a limited series on Netflix. It came out maybe, I don't know, a month or so ago. But it is based on a true story about this comedian in the UK who ended up having a stalker. And the series is just such an interesting, nuanced story because it's not just like a classic cut and dry stalker situation. Like the comedian was kind of like feeding into it a little bit for his own reasons, and like it was just spiraling and spiraling and spiraling, and super well done. And the main actor is actually the comedian who this happened to, so he like stars in this limited series about the situation that happened.
Oh my gosh.
Super good show. It's
Where
a
did
little
the name
heavy
come
at
from?
times. It's what she called him. She called him Baby Reindeer, and they have it'll explain it or whatever, but I don't want to give anything away.
Okay.
Very good. It's a little heavy at times, but man, I was hooked. It was one of those shows that I just wanted to binge all in one night.
Did
Yeah,
you see
I've seen
this,
other people
like,
say that.
pop up like on Netflix's homepage, or was it recommended to you like with Kaylee's show?
I think I'd seen maybe one or two people talk about it on either Instagram or Twitter. And so, yeah, I was like, the premise sounded interesting. So I just started it, and man, so good.
All right.
Yeah, I always pay attention to how people find these shows because I feel like if I just see something on Netflix, I'm like, nah. But if it's like mentioned somewhere else multiple times, I'm like, huh. So
Yeah.
Same for me with books. I'm like, I want to know that it's good before I invest many, many hours in this. Same with the show. It's many, many hours. So
yeah.
Again, everyone, tell me what's good and I'll trust your opinions instead of deciding for yourself. Oh, God.
Yes.
Back to the theme.
Listen to our recommendations. I love that we immediately were like, okay,
don't
trust
listen
yourself.
to your own
However,
voice.
Listen to what we're telling you.
But always trust our media recommendations. Consistently reliable. Oh, gosh. Well, a good topic today. Thanks for diving into the weeds with me.
Good idea, Kaylee.
It's been a good conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cheers, y'all.
All right.
Good
Cheers.
Until next time. Cheers.
All right.